Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to the third episode of our webinar on war on Ukraine. It is absolutely sad day that today is the 16th day of the conflict and the war. And today we have gathered here to discuss what Canada can do. Before I open the session, let me do the treaty recognition. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homelands of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Ladies and gentlemen, as I said, today is the 16th day of the invasion. We are keeping up with the news in all the major channels. Mariupol is devastated, Children's Hospital is bombarded, and we have seen the increasing number of casualties on the ground. We also know that humanitarian corridors has been opened up. 2 million Ukrainians so far escaped from the horror of the war. The Lutsk airport near Lviv has already been attacked. As we envisaged, Russian army is invading and gaining momentum in the country. We also know nuclear power plants are at risk. United Nations Security Council today gathered together the experts and discussed about the risk of nuclear disaster. This is one of the conflicts in the century which has crossed all the limits of Geneva Convention. The invaders has consistently attacked civilians, and which is absolutely tantamount to war crime. Ladies and gentlemen, we have requested and welcomed 3 of our policymakers today, and those who are going to share their ideas in terms of Canadian support for the people of Ukraine. But before I introduce them and welcome them, let me play 2 brief videos. And first of all, you would watch and listen the video of Sofia Fedina, the Member of Parliament from Ukraine. In this regard, let me remind you, we have aired our lengthy interview of Sofia Fedina, and it is available in our website. You can always review her ideas and concepts about the conflict. Have a listen.
Any territory. Ukraine was not attacking Moscow territory. They came to our land to kill our people, and we have a right to defend ourselves.
Do you feel safe when you're traveling around Ukraine? Because do you trust the notion, because of what you're saying about the shelling, which we've reported on, you don't trust the existence of humanitarian corridors?
Actually, we do not feel safe. But we are the members of the parliament, and people trust in us, and people wait that we can do something to protect them. So I think that we should do everything to help people who are in the most hit war zones, and especially this is Kiev, this is Kharkiv, this is Sumy, Ochtyrka. We have the situation in Mykolaiv, in Kherson, nearby Odessa, Vinnytsia. 100 kilometers from my native city of Lviv, there was, on the beginning of the invasion, also an air attack to the military deployments. So no one can feel safe in Ukraine. But the question is that it's very easy to stop war. We have to make Moscow Federation to back off and to take its army away. How we can make it when the country is a terrorist and they are making a pressure on every other country, especially with oil, with gas, and with other questions. We have actually to put all the package of sanctions. This is first, and we do not have a right to stop. The second is Ukraine needs weapon, a lot of weapon, especially planes, to protect itself. I would like to underline that Ukraine had never invaded any territory. Ukraine was not attacking Moscow territory. They came to our land to kill our people, and we have a right to defend ourselves. Yeah. And the third, no-fly zone. I know this is a big discussion all over the world, but I think that we live in a hybrid times. And maybe we do not need a direct decision, but we can elaborate the hybrid approach, how to close Ukrainian sky. Because on the land, on the ground, we can fight Moscow soldiers, and we do this very well. What we need a support with, this is how to combat air attacks, missile attacks that Moscow Federation is using not against military infrastructure. They are using ballistic rockets. They are using multiple rocket launchers against civilian sector, against civilians, and first of all, schools, kindergartens, and hospitals.
Sophia, how worried are you about the safety of your president? He's issued a defiant video overnight, Zelensky saying he's in the presidential palace, he's going to stay in Kyiv. Are you worried for him? Do you think he's safe?
I hope he is safe, but I really support his position that he is not leaving the country. I'm from opposition party, actually, and we were not happy with his actions for the last 3 years. But nowadays, he is doing right thing, being in Ukraine with Ukrainian people and with Ukrainian army. And his messages, and actually all the messages of all parties of Ukraine are right. We are supporting our nation. And it's very important to understand that this is not a combat Zelensky is waging. We have real heroes, and these are our army, our territorial defense, our volunteer soldiers, our volunteers who are helping army, and actually every representative of Ukrainian nation is a hero today. That is the unity of people, and I'm joking, sadly joking, that Putin united all Ukraine, because Ukraine had never been so united since the independence was proclaimed. All the people, regardless of region, regardless of language, regardless of their political views, are united against Putin in favor of Ukraine. And now I think that regardless even of who is on the top of the country will fight for its independence and its future.
So that was about Member of Parliament Sofia Fedina speaking from Ukraine. And as I said, the audience, we have a full-length interview in our website, www.crick.org. You can always visit and listen to her rest of the discussion. And we have also seen how resilient she is in terms of resisting the invading army. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll also briefly play the President Volodymyr Zelensky's short interview, and just have a listen here.
They want us to feel like animals because they blocked our cities, the biggest cities in Ukraine, and they blocked and because they don't want our people to get some food, water. Yesterday, for example, children. I don't know if you know the children in Mariupol was the child was dead. Yes, you know that is the idea of this operation, or I don't know how was Putin telling about it. So that is the idea to do with Ukrainians animals, but we are not.
So how do you stop it? Are you prepared to do a deal? You've said you're happy to talk.
We can't stop alone all this. You know, it's only if the world will unite around Ukraine.
Uniting around Ukraine.
They are not. They're still. It's still very slowly. It's still very slowly. But you can feel it only when you are here, because the people from Europe or USA, it's far from Ukraine. It's far from the heart of this tragedy, and you can't see, you can't understand the details because you are not fighting here. And I understand why. And I don't want them to fight, but these countries can help, can unite. Because we can't speak about the close. I'm sorry that I'm speaking again and again about this problem, but we spoke about children hospitals, etc. And you know the number of these child deaths, and so we are speaking about closing the sky. You can't decide to close or not to close. You can't decide. If you are united against the Nazism and this terror, you have to close. Not me. Don't wait me asking you several times, a million times, close the sky. No, you have to phone us to our people who lost their children and say, sorry, we didn't do it yesterday, 1 week ago. We didn't push Putin. We didn't speak with him a lot. We didn't find the dialogue with him. We did nothing. And it's true. Yesterday, the world did nothing. I'm sorry, but it's true.
Boris Johnson,
yeah,
the British Prime Minister, as a number of other world leaders, say if they do that, if they close the sky, that could exacerbate and make the situation even worse. If they allow Poland to provide you jets and station it on NATO land, that will make it worse. What would you say?
What does mean worse? For whom? So the first question is rhetoric. And we don't need rhetoric questions and answers. We have to have contradict things. So it would be worse for whom? For our families? No. For whom? For them? No. Who knows? Nobody knows. But we know exactly that now is very bad. And in future, it will be too late. And believe me, if it's prolonged this way, yes, you will see they will close the sky, but we'll lose millions of people.
Thank you, dear audience, for being with us for these two very profound clips, and especially I would like to emphasize on the president's comments that whether the no-fly zone should be effective immediately so that it can save lives. Ladies and gentlemen, as I promised, let me welcome our distinguished panelists today. And before I welcome them once again, let me also apprise you what Canada is doing. So the visit of our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has just ended in some of the countries, including Poland and Germany. And today, Canada declared 32 more entities would be under sanction. And Canada also declared $20 million in donations from Canadians, which would go in the matching fund with the Canadian Red Cross, allocating $50 million from Canada's $100 million contribution for humanitarian aid, and also investing additional $117 million to implement Canada's new immigration measures to welcome those who are fleeing the war in Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome our first speaker today, the Honourable Member of the Parliament, Kevin Lemeroux from Liberal Party. Sir, floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Hauser. I appreciate that, and it's nice to see you hosting a special event, a webinar that you're doing this evening. You know, like many people across Canada, I'm listening to the news, whether it's in the afternoon at times or in the evening before I retire for the evening, and you know, it's hard to imagine the types of things that we're seeing on our TV screens or on through the internet or hearing about, whether it's in the work environment or in our homes as we're talking to our children and loved ones about what's taking place in Ukraine today. And, you know, when I reflect on it, it's one thing for us in Canada where things are very peaceful and we have you know, electricity and the flow of water, and we take a lot of things for granted. And, you know, I was thinking in terms of the days in which I was in the Canadian Forces back in the early 80s. And what happened was on November 11, I would actually walk in parades with World War II veterans. And the reason why I bring it up is because often after the parades, we would go to the legions and you would see these grown men in tears reflecting on the horrors that they saw in World War II. It's hard to imagine having to live through the types of things that they had to live through. And when we take a look in terms of what's happening today, it's one thing for us to be able to provide a thought or a comment while we're here in the comforts of being in Canada, versus being and living in Kyiv or anywhere else in Ukraine today. And I think that's one of the important messages that needs to be highlighted. The reality is It is a war. And we don't know where it's going to end, what other things or factors are going to be brought into it. Many say that it could ultimately lead to a World War III and the profound impact that might have in every very real way. Back in January, I suspect most of my constituents and arguably most Canadians, I didn't believe that Ukraine would be under attack to the degree in which it's being attacked today. I really believe at the end of the day, Putin has shocked the world, at least in good part, to the degree in which he has brought war to the people of Ukraine and, in fact, to the world. And the world has been responding. I am glad to see the high sense of cooperation that we see here in Canada. And it expands beyond the politicians. We need to recognize, and I remember for a long time, James would highlight the population of people of Ukrainian heritage. We have 1.3 million people of Ukrainian heritage. And we would often say, what's happening in Ukraine today is something that we care about here in Canada, and would often attribute to that proud Ukrainian heritage that's in Canada. This and what we're seeing in Ukraine today affects all of us. You don't have to be of Ukrainian heritage in order to appreciate in terms of what is actually taking place today. We had, President Zelensky just moments ago talking about hospitals, talking about children. The death that's occurring, those horrors of war are being lived today. I'm 60 years old, and I didn't believe that as a Western world or as a civilization that we would ever be going in this direction again, that we've learned from our past. And what we're witnessing is shocking a lot of people. No one more so than the people of Ukraine. So what can we do? Well, I have seen a great sense of cooperation, not only political parties in Ottawa, but different levels of government. And to give you an example of why it's so important for different levels of government, is we have now indicated collectively, and all members of Parliament understand and support the need to get refugees into Canada, that safe haven. And what we are saying is that it is an unlimited number. And we're opening our doors. And so Ottawa makes that declaration and puts in the administration or that bureaucracy in order to accommodate what could be a lot of people coming from Ukraine to Canada over the coming weeks and months. That's one of the roles that we're doing at the national level. At the provincial level, they're looking for ways in which each and every province might be able to accommodate the numbers of people that are coming in. So you get provincial governments that are engaged. Today and yesterday, I've had 3 people contact me directly saying that they want to be able to assist by bringing people into their homes. And that's what I mean in terms of, the good nature and the willingness to deal with the need that is very real and very tangible. And everyone is coming to the table. Another example would be the need for humanitarian aid. The province of Manitoba, through the provincial government, says we want to be able to donate, so they donated to humanitarian. We know that the federal government also made a donation. Then you have community groups throughout Canada also raising money, donating, whether it's a church or the Canadian Ukrainian Congress. And then some people say, well, what about having matching funds? And so the federal government through Red Cross says that, look, Let's have some matching funds and allow people to contribute, and Ottawa would match those funds. Initially, it was a cap of 10 million. Now it's been tripled because it was used up so quickly, that 10 million. Again, recognizing the importance of humanitarian aid. We all came together. There's other ways in which we can help. We hear a lot about sanctions. And we are moving forward on sanctions. You know, every day we hear something additional related to some form of a sanction, whether it's on an individual or it's on the nation as a whole. And whatever Canada can do, it will do. But what's really important, the other night I was at a conference here in downtown at the Ukrainian Center, and someone said, well, let's talk about the no-fly zone. And it is a hot issue. And I think what's really important is that Canada continues to work with our allied countries, with NATO. Look in terms of how it is we can, in fact, play a leadership role. Some of these issues are very difficult. And on first brush, one might say, well, you know, let's put in a no-fly zone. Let's completely exempt any form of application and just allow people to get onto the plane and fly into Canada. I'm not around those meetings that take place. But what I do know is that there is a lot of smart people within our allied countries, including Canada, that every day are looking at the ground situation and making decisions that I believe will ultimately save lives. I don't want to predict where we're going to be at, per se, but what I do know is that we have to do everything that we can, supplying lethal weapons, training where we can, providing humanitarian aid, working with our allied countries for those additional sanctions, and whatever else we can possibly come up with, to continue to encourage and to promote different political parties, different levels of government, Canadians as a whole, and encourage to continue to work together. I'm looking forward to this Tuesday because we will have at least a virtual presence of a second president of the Ukraine presenting to the members of parliament and senators, and through that to all Canadians. Ukraine and Canada have a very special relationship. We've had it for many, many years. We have it today, and we're going to have it well into the future. We are committed to be there for Ukraine, to support in whatever way we can through working with allied countries and opening our doors to be able to provide a safe haven to those that we can. And Hauser, I don't know exactly where I'm at time, so I think I'll end it at that point.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I think it's a wonderful explanation of Canadian support. And the audience, you have just heard Member of the Parliament, Honorable Kevin Lemeroux's orientation and his description of Canada's support to Ukraine. Now it's time, let me welcome the Honorable Member of the Parliament, James Bizan, and from Manitoba. And of course, we would like to know more about his ideas and his support for the people of Ukraine. And James Bizan, Honorable James Bizan, is from Conservative Party. Sir, floor is yours. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Hauser and Gary and colleagues. Great to see you all. Wish it was under different circumstances. You know, this is a sad time. You know, for those of us that are of Ukrainian heritage, you know, Heather and I often talk about who has more Canadians that identify as Ukrainians, Ukrainian heritage in our ridings. But I think I'm number 3 overall in Canada. But you know, my Baba and Guido, my grandparents came from Chernovitzy Oblast, so far an area that hasn't been touched. But I've been to Ukraine many, many times. I've been on the defense file for the Conservatives for the past 10 years. In the last 2 weeks, I got switched over to Shadow Minister of Ethics, but I have been Shadow Minister of National Defense for 6 years, 2 years Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Defense, and 2 years as Chair of the National Defense Committee. And National Defense Committee over that decade has done many studies on Ukraine. And although Kevin talks about being surprised and shocked, I'm one of the people that have always felt and thought that Putin was going to escalate and Putin would do an invasion. And that's why, in the past, we provided lethal aid after the Maidan. I was at the Maidan, I was there. I've met, Yanukovych, I've met Poroshenko, I've met Yushchenko before that. I'm banned from Russia because I've been an outspoken critic of the regime in Moscow. And, there is, as I said, there's only one person that can stop this war, and that's Vladimir Putin. He's the one that continues to escalate the aggression, starting with Crimea and Donbass and propping up the Yanukovych regime originally and trying to stop Ukrainians from achieving their goals and dreams of further European integration, of having freedom and democracy, of stomping out corruption and providing a democratic free society that respects the rule of law. And Putin saw this as a threat and something that was definitely leaking into Belarus, as we have seen with the protests there against Lukashenko. And we're starting to see in Russia on the streets, and the brave Russians who have taken to the streets and have been arrested, and who knows where they're being detained. I'm suspect that the gulags are up and going again in Siberia, as we've witnessed in the past. And that is disturbing for, I think, all of us. There's no question that we're witnessing atrocities. Putin has to be hauled in front of the International Criminal Court and tried for war crimes. He keeps violating the Geneva Convention. Every piece of paper that the Russian Federation has signed since the end of the Soviet Union in 1991 hasn't been worth the paper it's written on. And so when you look at Ukraine's territorial sovereignty, integrity being protected underneath the Budapest Memorandum, or Bucharest Memorandum, or Budapest Memorandum, he is still, completely threw that away. The Minsk peace agreements 1 and 2 doesn't apply like this. It just proves that Vladimir Putin is a pathological liar. And every time that, the government of Ukraine under, President Zelensky tries to sit down and negotiate anything of peace, you just don't expect them to actually honor any of those negotiations. Diplomacy is by far the best option here. Trying to end this conflict, trying to get Russian troops to go home. They're doing, if you look at the way they've been fighting and the way they've been, so far stalled out by the bravery of Ukrainian soldiers, as well as those courageous volunteers who have stepped up. Their effectiveness is because they're fighting for their motherland. They're fighting for their families. They're fighting for their community. They're fighting for freedom. In fact, they're fighting for all our freedom. And the troops in Russia are fighting for a despot, a tyrant. And they know that the acts of barbarism that we're witnessing is something that they're going to be held to account for. And so many of them are wanting to walk away. I support what the government of Canada has done in applying lethal weapons, of bringing forward all the sanctions. If you look at how the Soviet Union finally failed, it failed because it went bankrupt. And if we break the financial back of Vladimir Putin and his oligarchs and take away the money that funds his war machine, we will ultimately succeed. But that takes time. And so there needs to be more done. And Putin is provoked by weakness. And for whatever reasons, he's provoked by Winter Olympics. He invaded Crimea and started the war in Donbass after the Sochi Olympics. He invaded Ossetia in Georgia after the South Korean Winter Olympics. And now after the Beijing Winter Olympics, he invades the entire country of Ukraine, full-scale invasion, mass atrocities, and all of us are heartbroken. We have to put everything on the table. Every time President Biden stands up and says that the United States and Russia will not go to war against each other, that provokes Putin. He sees that as a green light. He can rattle his nuclear saber and step up and do whatever he wants. So we have to start changing our own rhetoric and say everything's on the table, including, it's understandable why Ukraine wants us to put in a no-fly zone. We've done it as NATO and other nations. And because, Putin is acting irrationally, we all have to step back. The lethal weapons we've been calling for since 2018 to be supplied. So they're there now. The training of troops under Operation Unit Fire, not just Canadian forces training Ukrainian soldiers, but the Americans, the Brits, and other nations that have stepped up. The Polish army has been incredible. That's why the Ukrainians are out fighting on the ground the Russians, because they are so well trained. And the more that we can make sure that supply lines are there, so they're getting more weapons, they don't run out of ammo, that they can continue to be so valiant in their efforts, the more effective they are in defeating the Russian barbarian hordes that have come across the border. We have to look at, also how we get more supplies to them, including we got surplus armored vehicles right now. We've got a whole new stock of new labs coming in. Let's move our Bison armored ambulances, our armored personnel carriers that we're about to retire, but they're still in working order and in pretty decent shape. Let's move those over there as quickly as possible. Let's take some of our Role 1, Role 2, Role 3 hospitals that we have used in Afghanistan, and a lot of that were just recently purchased for the pandemic and not used. We should be shipping those over. Work with the humanitarian aid groups, the Canada Ukraine Foundation, League of Ukrainian Canadians, the International Red Cross, Canadian Red Cross, and Global Medic. These are great organizations providing that humanitarian relief. I'm talking to others as well and trying to get ways to coordinate more sponsorship, more funding, more supplies in to help that humanitarian effort. And I spent over the last week meeting with municipalities in my riding. Let's identify excess housing stock, whether it's under government housing stock that's not fully being utilized. There's a lot of people that have beautiful properties out at the lake, secondary residences. Maybe we can sponsor families there as well. Let's look at all the options, because people are going to need a home, and let's make sure that Canada is always there for them. 1.4 million Ukrainian Canadians already, lots of family connections there. But I see, as Kevin already mentioned, when I go to these rallies, when I'm speaking out, there is people from every walk of life in Canada that are coming out and around the world to support Ukraine right now, knowing that it's a fight for our freedom and our civil liberties and our human rights. And let's make sure that we're there for them as they pay the ultimate sacrifice in protecting all of us at this moment in time.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member of Parliament James Bizan, for your I would say very eloquent description of Canadian support. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Honorable Member of Parliament Heather McPherson from NDP, and also to give you and share with you that she's the NDP's foreign affairs critic, and she actually spoke with CBC, very heart-wrenching and I would say, a very interesting interview a couple of days ago, sharing the stories of refugees. So without further ado, Honourable Member of Parliament Heather McPherson, floor is yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thank you for letting me be with you all today, and thank you to my colleagues for their words. This moment in time, we don't always agree as parliamentarians, but I think right now all parliamentarians are trying to find ways to do absolutely everything we can for the people of Ukraine. And I'm really proud of the way that our parliamentarians have been working together, have been trying to find solutions. To be honest, I think the government has done a great job listening to the suggestions being brought forward by the opposition to make those responses better. So thank you to both James and to Kevin for their words ahead of me. And I also, really want to just take a small minute to start to just say how incredible it is to be a Canadian and to watch Canadians from coast to coast stand up for the people of Ukraine over the last couple of weeks. You can't walk into a shop or a restaurant in Edmonton right now where they are not raising funds for Ukraine, where there is not a Ukrainian flag flying, where people are not standing in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. You know, I was in a greenhouse today, and they were selling plants, and the proceeds were going to help with the efforts in Ukraine. One of my friends owns a tattoo parlor, and yesterday he was giving tattoos, and the proceeds were going to help the people of Ukraine. Like, Canadians, not just Ukrainian Canadians, all Canadians are so strongly behind the people of Ukraine, and that, you know, that is exactly how it should be. I just returned from being in Poland. I was in Geneva meeting with folks from the Red Cross, from OCHA, from the United Nations humanitarian branch, meeting with folks to talk about what could be done. And then I did go to Warsaw and to the border, and was able to meet with some of the newly arrived Ukrainian refugees that were fleeing the violence in Ukraine. It was a very difficult few days, as you can imagine, to meet some of the families coming over the border, you know, to meet the grandparents who have their grandchildren and don't know where their children are or if they will ever see their children again. The children who have said goodbye to their father at the border and are now trying to make sense of a world that was turned up on its head within a week. You know, mothers trying to keep things together, the folks that are all alone and don't know what they're going to do. You know, for me, one of the real powerful images I saw was to see the Polish people stand up and do everything they could for the Ukrainians crossing into their country. You know, Poland is not a wealthy country. They do not have unlimited resources, and they were there for the Ukrainians that were coming over. And I'm so proud of the Polish people for that. But I think it's one of those things that Canada needs to take into account. And, you know, Kevin spoke of this, James spoke of this, but immigration is going to be a key way that Canada can help right now, because Poland is not going to be able to take in the millions of refugees that are fleeing the violence in Ukraine. They just can't. They don't have the resources to do that. So we need to make sure that they can get to Canada. I love the idea that James put forward of where are we going to put them? Let's look at all the options. Let's really think this through and think about the ways to make this happen. You know, I will continue to call for visa-free travel. My colleague that was the member of Parliament for Edmonton Strathcona before me, Linda Duncan, called for that in 2018. My colleague from Manitoba, Daniel Blakey, called for it in 2020. You know, if we had that in place now, if visa-free travel was in place for Ukrainians now, we would be in a better situation. So I will continue to call for that, because the faster we can bring people in, the better. The faster that we can get them out of the violence, but also out of those communities that are going to be very stretched, trying to deal with their influx of immigration is important. And we have to also be very realistic. Our IRCC, our immigration system, is broken. It's deeply broken, and we can't fix it fast enough to help these immigrants get here and these refugees get here as fast as they need to. So more needs to be done on that front, 100%. The other piece that I think is really important that we really need to look at is that humanitarian response. Wonderful to see that the initial 10 million matching with the Red Cross, of course, the additional 20 million for the Red Cross, the money that's been announced for bilateral aid. Great, it's super. But first of all, it needs to continue. This is going to be a long-term rebuild for Ukraine. Once this violence is over, Ukraine is going to rely on Canada for a very long time. And we have a bad habit in humanitarian aid. I've spent my career in humanitarian aid. We have a bad habit of changing the channel. We have a bad habit of looking away, and we can't look away. This is a long-term strategy that we need to put in place and that we need to stay on. And that's going to be my role. I'm going to be keeping my eyes. I wrote to the minister today to say we need reassurance that this is going to be a long-term commitment. That's another piece that we have. You know, in terms of the sanctions, 100%, those are going to take some time. But we saw additional sanctions today. We saw sanctions against those that are closest to Putin. So we do have the ability to do that. I feel it should have been done sooner. It should have been done on day one. This sort of trickling out of sanctions, I don't think is as useful as if they had all happened at once. But I do understand the complexity that we are working with our allies, that all of these sanctions work better when we work in concert with our allies. So all of those things, I think, are things that we can continue to push for. Making sure that there is defensive aid going to Ukraine, I think is vital that we do that. Those are the areas that I'm really keeping my eye on and really watching, because in my mind, as I think about what Canada can do, what we have the capacity to do as a country, we are not a superpower. And while we have an extraordinary military who has done an awful lot to train Ukrainian military, who is doing an awful lot in Latvia with Project Reassurance, we don't have the biggest military, and we are not the closest country to Ukraine. So what are those things that Canada can do that are most effective, that can help the most Ukrainians now? And I think the efforts we're making on the sanctions, the efforts we're making on the humanitarian aid, and the efforts that we're making on immigration and helping people flee from the violence that's facing them are where Canada can be the most effective right now. And this is changing. I'll just finish by saying the situation is rapidly changing. And so I know that my party, that I'm sure all parties within the House of Commons are very seized with how our response has to change to adapt to that. And we'll continue to look at that, and we'll continue to adapt our response as the situation in Ukraine changes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member of Parliament Heather McPherson, for giving us a very comprehensive overview and what Canada can do. And it's really important, dear audience, to carefully listen to her words. She says that it's going to be a long-haul support for Ukraine in the future. The audience, we are now into the question and answer session. It's a moderated question and answer session. And I would like to welcome at this stage the advisor to Conflict and Resilience Research Institute, Mr. Gary Senft. And Gary and I would be having a couple of questions for our distinguished panelists today. Gary, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Kauser. I'd like to begin by firstly thanking Kauser for the opportunity to have this platform to bring these people together today. It's the Conflict and Resilience Research Institute of Canada. I think what's important to know is this organization is involved in conflict generally. So whether it's with the Rohingya crisis in Sudan, wherever it's occurring, they are all important. There's a new podcast, I think it's called Nothing is Foreign. Nothing is foreign. It's a very interesting idea. We should think about that for a moment. So with those thank yous away, I'd like to also thank each of the members for appearing today. This was pulled together very quickly. They were extremely accommodating and just jumped to the pump to have the opportunity to speak their hearts and their just strong resilience today. And resilience is the other part of the title, Conflict and Resilience Research. And the Ukrainian people are showing incredible resilience and resoluteness to stay in this game, really, I think, on behalf of the world, as opposed to simply Ukraine. So that's important. To me, nothing is foreign, it's personal. So like James, I have some on my wife's side, Ukrainian background, on the wife's side, both sides. On my side, more German and Russian. And so to me, this is a very interesting situation, and it really makes one think. My background is also a lawyer, so I think of rule of law, and this is a fundamental violation of the rule of law. We work with Rotary Peace Builder Committee, and we're trying to look at institutions in the United Nations, and the fundamentals of the United Nations are being breached every day, every way. And, they're criminal acts. So where does this go? We said, how do we unite? We have to think about that. The United Nations, how do we bring people together in so many formats? So the first question I have, and maybe we could just go in the order that we went in originally, is explain in your mind, is this war different? And if so, how? Now, you've touched on it, I think, a little bit, but a lot of people have said to me, there's wars everywhere. Is this just another war, or what is this? So just briefly, thoughts?
Well, Gary, I think the answer to that, in terms of in recent history, this war is in fact very different. You have a superpower that in a very aggressive fashion invading a sovereign nation, a nation that has boundaries, its own people, and in very much we all understand and appreciate the importance of that issue of sovereignty. And because you have a superpower and it's Ukraine, I do believe that, you know, this is about as close as we can get. You'd have to go back to the cold days when we are at the possible doorstep of a World War III breaking out. You know, I think the world is hoping and praying that we don't see more countries being invaded, and that Ukraine is not just a stepping stone for Russia to go into other territories, other sovereign nations. In fact, it needs to get out of Ukraine.
So I'll jump in then, Gary. Kauser, like, you know, this is the first major war in Europe since the end of the Second World War, so over 70 years. And, you know, we've seen these great power struggles before, but what makes this one different is that we actually have a country that's threatening to use their nuclear weapons. And they aren't at all, Putin is not at all ashamed of committing mass atrocities. The talk of using chemical weapons, the cutting of power to nuclear stations right now, you know, Chernobyl needs to be powered up if it's going to keep that failed reactor cooled down. And, you know, he doesn't care if it starts leaking radiation and impacting the health of Ukrainians, but it's right on the Belarusian border. So Belarus will also feel the impact, and he doesn't care, even though they're fighting with him. So if you got somebody that's thinking so pathologically and callous about humanity itself, you know, this is a different dynamic. You know, a lot of people are making comparisons to Hitler, even comparing him to Stalin and the genocides that were perpetrated against the people of Ukraine with Holodomor, Stalin with Holocaust, or Hitler with Holocaust. You know, Putin's going to go down as one of the great villains in history. And so how long do we sit back? We're at that moment. Are we going to be Chamberlain or are we going to be Churchill? And, you know, that's the balancing act that everybody, especially from NATO nations, are trying to make. Best outcome, you know, Putin backs off, UN peacekeeping forces move in from non-NATO members, and that we can actually resolve the conflict. But Putin's not taking his foot off the gas here, despite the difficulties they have, despite the financial crisis that's been happening in their own backyard now. You know, ruble is down to 1 cent on Canadian exchange and the New York exchange. So, you know, they are hurting big time. All the, you know, multinational companies have pulled out of Moscow and the rest of Russia. Like, how long do the people of Russia allow the Putin and his kleptocrats in the Kremlin continue on down this path? You know, one thing that also people don't talk about much is that the Russian soldiers that have been, you know, killed so far, you know, that are not going home, you know, in body bags to be received by their mothers and widows and their families. Russians have mobile crematoriums running around right now, and that's how they're getting rid of the evidence that they're actually waging war in Ukraine. They've been doing it for a while. It started with Donbass. And so again, you know, we talk about violations of the Geneva Convention. You know, Putin's committing against his own people. And that again, is more disturbing. And how he's trying to provoke Belarus into even bringing in more of their own army by firing upon, you know, having their jets fly into Ukraine territory and come back around and fire into Russian communities. It's despicable. And there is a price to pay for this.
Thank you.
I'll be very quick. Thank you for the question, Gary. So you asked about why this war is different, and one thing I do want to just say very quickly is that all war is terrible. Every war that is happening around the world is terrible, and I don't think any of us want to start ranking the horrors of war that are happening, whether they be in Afghanistan, whether they be in, you know, Yemen, wherever they be. I think it's really important that our common humanity is what makes war horrible wherever it happens. but this war has some things that are different, and I think James touched on that a little bit. But it is that geopolitical impact that this war has, and the implications for surrounding countries. The implications having NATO involved, of course, is part of that. But it is that nuclear piece. It is that nuclear threat that is part of this war that is not part of other wars, that makes it so different. You know, I have been working really hard with some of my colleagues, with Senator Doug Roach, many other colleagues on disarmament prior to this. And I think this is a wake-up call for us. There will be megalomaniac madmen that will have power. And when they have nuclear weapons, they have the rest of the world over a barrel. And that is so dangerous, and it is just a matter of time until those nuclear weapons are used. One thing I'd also just touch on is, you talked a little bit about the UN and some of those multilateral institutions. I think that's a huge thing that all of us should be calling for. We need UN reform. There is no way that Russia should be able to be chairing the Security Council right now. That is absurd. And the fact that the ICC and the ICJ need to get involved, the International Criminal Court and International Court of Justice, I mean, we need to hold Putin accountable for the war crimes that he is committing on the Ukrainian people. Full stop.
Thank you so much. So another hard question. Putin clearly thinks he is going to win. He, in fact, thought he won before he left the gates. I think he's been surprised by the Ukrainian resolve. So how does Ukraine win this battle? They want to win. I'm just going to ask you to think about that. We're not fighting maybe, and years and years and years of subjugation. How can they win?
If we're going around the table again, Gary, I think that Putin went in this believing that it wouldn't be as complicated as it's turned out to be, and that's a direct result of individuals like President Zelensky. And I love his statement, and I don't know, I can't think of it exactly, but it was something like, I don't need a ride, when he was offered to get out of Ukraine. I don't need a ride. I need bullets, I think it was, or something
ammunition
of that nature. And and the resolve of Ukraine and Ukrainian people to protect their homeland, to not surrender, and is just truly amazing. And that resolve will ensure that Putin cannot and will not prevail. And I truly believe that.
Thank you.
So let me just say, actually, one of my friends gave me this line, so I can't take credit for it. But the Ukrainians have proven they've got the grit. Let's give them the kit. So let's make sure that they have everything they can to protect their airspace. I support 100% in giving former Silitair fighter jets to Ukraine, whether it's coming from Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, wherever we can find them. Let's push them in, and let's not make excuses why we can't do it. You turn them over to the Ukrainian Air Force, let them fly it, and go for it. Give them the anti-aircraft capabilities on the ground. Let them be able to put in place the humanitarian aid corridors so people can escape and humanitarian relief can make it to those cities. They got to be able to protect those corridors if they can't protect their entire airspace. There is that is short term. Making sure we have ample body armor, weapons, ammo to keep them fighting against what's really a broken supply chain coming out of Russia to their own forces. So let's make sure that everything is going there. The next step in this is that NATO does have to strengthen its presence in the east. So Operation Reassurance to enhance forward positions in Latvia and across the Baltics have to continue, including air policing in Romania. I know we're talking about going back there in July. We should go now. We should get there as soon as we can to make sure that we have our ability to protect NATO airspace itself. And then the third, more longer thing is that we are a neighbor of Russia in the Arctic. They have claimed the entire Arctic Ocean seabed right up into our economic zone on 200-mile limit in the Arctic off the archipelagos. So we have to invest in our own Arctic sovereignty and security and NORAD and NATO and update. We need new fighter jets. We need to get new Navy ships in the sea. deterrence is by far the best way to stop a bully like Putin. And so we do have to make major investments. It's going to cost a lot of dollars to do this, but it's something that is overdue, and we have to do it now, and we have to do it quickly.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll just add to what everybody has already brought forward. So Kevin and James have already spoken about some of the things that we can do right now, but I can't help but think that we also have to acknowledge the heroes that are the Ukrainian people and the unbelievable resilience they've shown. Like it was that no one expected that the Ukrainian people could hold off the Russian military for 16 days. And they have done so, and they have done so incredibly valiantly. I mean, who in this country isn't just a little bit in love with President Zelensky right now? Who doesn't look at him and think this is the epitome of what a leader is? That said, I think 100%. One of the things that needs to be done immediately is we need to start protecting those humanitarian corridors. When I see hospitals with children in them being bombed, that were meant to be part of a ceasefire so that people could evacuate. This is, again, these are war crimes. This is blatant attacks on civilians. There is no military targets there that they are using. This is something that we need to protect those corridors. We need to protect the neutrality of humanitarian organizations like the Red Cross that are going in. They need to be able to be protected. And you know, we talked about this already, but don't underestimate breaking the economic back of Putin. That is something that I think, in addition to all of the other terrible things Putin is, he is greedy. He is greedy, and this hurts him. And it hurts him because the people that he surrounds himself with will only be able to take this for so long. So that's another one that I think it is important. I know it is not the most action-oriented thing, but shutting down their economy is helping Ukraine, and it's helping Ukraine win.
Let me just add on that, Gary. And we talked earlier about the UN and that they need need to reform. You know, there's no way that Russia should be on the UN Security Council committing atrocities. And you know, Putin is one of these strongmen. He loves to go to the conferences, thump his chest, glad hand, and backslap. And you know, we need to tell Putin you have to get out of Ukraine, but we also got to isolate him globally. Why is he on the G20? Why is he sitting on the OSCE, the Organization of Security Cooperation?
Yeah, the Arctic Council. He should be off all of these.
Yeah, and they're chairing the Arctic Council right now, and that's why all our Arctic nations have said they're not going to participate as long as they're there. So, you know, look, he's got to be isolated economically, isolated politically. You know, international embarrassment because plays right to his own psyche. And that's the only way that we're going to, at the end of the day here, really get him to back off and the people around him to actually start talking about, you know, it's time for him to go.
Thank you. I think you've answered this question in many ways in our discussion, but I still pose it. What does standing shoulder to shoulder mean? So this is a phrase that, you know, there's always a buzzword and a phrase that comes, and that's the ones that's being used in this case. Are we comfortable with that, shoulder to shoulder?
Well, for me, standing shoulder to shoulder means supporting each other to the nth degree. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that organizations like NATO and the coming together of nations has been actually quite encouraging, all with one purpose, and that is to send a very powerful message of unity to Putin and his actions. And as both Heather and James and we all talk about, that Putin needs to get out of Ukraine, but there also needs to be a consequence. So many of those international organizations, in particular places, institutions like NATO, I think are that much more unified. And we do stand shoulder to shoulder in trying to move forward. That's how I would interpret it, Gary.
Thank you.
I'll be quick because I know that we're getting near the end. And I'll just say I think as Canadians, we're proud to stand united. We're proud to stand shoulder to shoulder. I know I've heard from some of my friends in Ukraine that go, well, we're standing shoulder to shoulder. Why aren't we protecting the airspace? So you know, this is one that is also perception on, you know, in theater, you know, those that are actually in the fight. and those of us that are trying to do everything we can. I know that all of us as Canadians and the world right now is standing united with Ukraine, and we're doing what's possible. But again, as I said before, everything has to be on the table so we can truly stand shoulder to shoulder, arm in arm.
Thank you.
And just to add to what my colleagues have said, shoulder to shoulder means there for the long haul. It means being there for the long term. It means supporting Ukrainians now, supporting them in this dire time that they're in right now. But it also means being there to help rebuild Ukraine. It means being there with Poland. It means being there with our allies who are on the border that are doing more than their share in terms of helping Ukrainians. It means we walk the road together as much as we can. And that means that as Canadians, we have to find the best way, the most effective way with the tools that we have to help Ukrainians.
So thank you so much to all the members of Parliament who are here with us today. And Kausar, back to you, please.
Thank you so much, Gary, for the wonderful Q&A session. The audience, you have heard from all the honorable member of parliaments who quickly got together because we invited them just yesterday, and it is such a wonderful gesture on behalf of all of us. Thank you so much for coming in. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to summarize the whole discussion today because it is the war itself. It is so much, it has brought devastation. And you have heard from all the panelists today, we are in the brink of, whether we are in the brink of Third World War and whether all of our actions are going to resolve the crisis. Ladies and gentlemen, there are a number of lines of actions that we have discussed today with all the member parliaments who have shared their own ideas and insights. We spoke about the diplomatic lines of action. We talked about economic sanctions and how deep can this be organized. We also spoke about humanitarian action. But I would like to emphasize today on some of the aspects that honorable member of parliaments discussed, and this is about UN reform, Security Council reform. And as you have heard from Honorable MP James Bizan and Member of Parliament Heather Macpherson, that it is absolutely, I would say, paradoxical to have Russia in UN Security Council and as a chair. And we are not only dismayed, we are frustrated because this is the situation in UN. How do we expect a quick resolve of the international crisis such as Ukraine? Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to end by saying that in all war, civilians are the prime victim. Look at the desperate faces of the mothers clinging their children and fleeing Ukraine. Look at the orphans, those who are in the train station and those who are seeking shelters in so many places. And do they deserve such atrocity? And in this particular century, when we claim ourselves to be civilized, we claim ourselves to have established a rules-based order, ask yourselves, look into your heart, and then please come forward in support of Ukraine. From Canada to the people of Ukraine, we express our resolve to support you in the long haul as well. With this, I leave you, and I also would like to request you to kindly visit www.crick.org. We have all the episodes there, and please support the people of Ukraine. We are with Ukraine. Have a nice rest of the night, and good night. Bye-bye.